I have a friend, and he actually wrote a little blurb. He's a linguist and a neurologist, one of 3 in the world, at least that's what he tells me. PhD in linguistics and a neurologist in Maryland. And he wrote a book, and I can't remember the title, but the subtitle, The Silent E Speaks Out. Right? The silent, you know what the silent E is, right? The silent E speaks out. And his philosophy is he's against phonics entirely. Why should you learn to read b, a, t and put it together? Why don't you just say bat? It's a lot easier. If you think about it, it's a lot easier to just kind of say bat or understand it in a sentence. He feels, and he's a socialist, a real socialist. He says that's why this book could be seen as political, in a way. I didn't write it as such, but he says when phonics is the way to teach reading, and it's very mechanical, very behavioral, say B, has nothing to do with any concept, right? Any underlying idea, just say B, or B, or whatever. He's saying that mentality of teaching the masses, that approach, is perfect for what? For the corporations, for corporate America. Because they want people to just fit into their little slots, do their thing, not think for themselves, right? So it's like the proletariat speaks out. He wants to make the case that we have to have these kids think for themselves. So when I ask you why, and you say, well, that's how it's learned, that's how it's taught, I'm saying I'm totally against that. Let me give you what I would do. That you'll see where I'm coming from. Teaching a child to read, right? That's the question. The first thing I would do is say, oh, let's make a sign for mom, because you don't want mom to destroy this beautiful thing that you made with the blocks, right? Let's say, do not touch. Mom, do not touch. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. That has meaning. You're going to come home and you're going to say, oh my goodness, I can't touch, because that worked. It has meaning, right? I write a letter to somebody. Dear so-and-so, when are you coming home? Okay, now read it. He just said it. So he has an idea. What's the definition of reading? Do you have a definition of reading? What? I'll give you mine.
Understanding, basically, written expression.
Exactly. Right. It's understanding the written word. Understanding the written word. Perfect example. The kid reads something, and it says H-O-M-E, home. He says house. If you're a cognitive-oriented person, you go, keep reading. You got it. If you're phonetically oriented, like with the B-oriented, you're going to say, no, don't you see the It's home. See, this is what you're saying. You and 90% of the world out there agrees with you. Because this is, I say, the kid got the idea. The idea is more important than he'll wind up getting that at some point, like you did. Here's my other angle to that. I was taught that way too. Most of us were taught that way. Because you're a normal person, typical child, you fill in the gaps yourself. You, in effect, did what I'm talking about. You did it. In spite of the system, you did it. I'm just saying this is what I think, what I believe. And I say this half kidding, half serious. God forbid your kid needs to be taught in order to learn. If your kid needs to be taught to read, and really be taught, and not do it on his own, most of these kids in the system, they're in trouble. Because the system isn't working for the most part. With this phonetic approach, makes it more difficult for these kids. It's more difficult to put the sounds together. You didn't learn that way. I want to put these kids in natural situations so the language develops from within, instead of holding up a card and saying "t." That's how we learn. That's the natural way. What I believe, there's a developmental gap that happens. I want to go back to that process that they missed and fill in that gap. They could be 20 years old. I try to get them to fill that in. If they're under 7 or 8, and I got this from my neurologist friend, I asked him, when I get a kid like who's 4, 5, 6, 7, the progress just leaps, it just jumps. And he explained, kids 8, 9, 10, fine, they still learn 20, they learn, but it's in a different way. And I said, Steve, could you explain it? And he says, yeah, the language part of the brain develops till about 7 years old. Then it kind of locks in, it finishes, and then other things kind of take over. And if I can get, or you can get, with this book, right, this is, the first 4 kids have no language, nonverbal. If you can get these kids, that gap to be bridged while the language part of the brain is still developing. This is me, this isn't him. This is how I kind of understand it. Actually, it was from this guy, Jason Brown. He's a neurologist in the city. He explained this to me years ago. If I can get to that developing brain as it's developing and fill in that gap, like I did with Julia, okay, or Janie, then there's a normalization process that takes place. They kind of get normalized, hopefully. I mean, that's what we all want. We want our kids to be normal. That's the whole, that's what this is all about. So, but the way you do that is not taking a kid and say, oh, cat. That's not, who cares about, you know what the first word, I think what was your first word? Do you remember?
I know, yes.
Well, what was your first word? Roy, what was your, what, you know your first word?
No.
I'll tell you, generally speaking.
My oldest daughter was owl because that was her stuffed animal.
Okay, so she really connected. Generally speaking, first words of kids, it's not so much door, like teachers put labels on doors, for kindergarten, door, chair. There's no harm in that, or very often the first word is something like up, because they hear it. It's affect. There's an emotional part of up. Pick me up. Get up. Let's go. It's a feeling kind of word. It's usually, or it could be daddy, mommy, but it's usually not something like, telephone. Okay, fine. If you have a special relationship with something. So anyway, so that's my comment. You came here, and now I'm making you feel bad?
No.
It's not my intention.
I'm looking for answers. So I think in your book...
How old is he? He's
going to be 4 in December next month.
That's the perfect age. Hey, no sneezing. See, if he would laugh at that, I'd be good. Yeah. In my office, if you come, I stood on a chair, doing something on the drop ceiling, and the chair totally collapsed. So now I just have the back. You could pick the back and like 2 legs. Just one plane. That's it. No seat, no nothing. So I tell a kid, I would tell him, I would do it with him. I say, oh, you could sit over there. That's it. I just straight. I'm still waiting for the kid to say, what's wrong with you? That would be good. I had one kid, one of his first words was, broken. Okay, at least I elicited some language.